Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Anniken and I design knitting patterns and teach knitting workshops, and I live in the southwest of England. In today's video we're going to talk about how to achieve a good garment fit, how to knit garments that fit you. Whether you are a new viewer or a returning viewer, I really appreciate your time and I hope you like what you find on my channel, and I hope you consider subscribing. If you want to be notified every time I upload a video, then please click the notification bell. I normally upload videos on Friday morning and I do a combination of knitting tutorials, yarn and knitting product reviews, and my Confessions of a Yarn Addict podcast, which is every other Friday. So I hope you like what you see here. Please consider subscribing, it helps me a lot. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and do leave me a comment and let me know if you find this video helpful, or if you have any other tips you'd like to share with our viewers. So today I'm going to talk about how to achieve a good garment fit. This is a huge topic and I'm not going to go into modifications and alterations and garment maths as such. I'm going to just share some of my top tips that we can all do, whatever skill level we're at, whether you're knitting your first garment or whether you've been knitting clothes for yourself for decades. These are things that we can all think about and all learn from, I think. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. There are a few things you can do to give yourself the best chance of success before you even start knitting, and that is to be honest about a few things. One of those things is your size and your measurements. So it's not good enough to say I'm a size 20, I always buy a size 20, I wear a size 38C bra. I've had that from a friend once. Yes, 38. What are your bra sizes? Doesn't normally relate to what size you pick in a knitting pattern, or rather it does, but you don't normally have bra sizes listed in a knitting pattern. But I did have that answer from a friend once when I asked her which size she was knitting. She told me a bra size, so I got a tape measure out and measured her, and then we chose a size which wasn't the size she thought she was. So do be honest about a few things. Do actually get a tape measure out and measure yourself. We'll talk more about taking accurate measurements later. The second thing you need to be honest about is your shape. I don't really want to use the kind of the fruit shapes to describe a body because I really like it, but be honest about your shape, and also be honest about the shape of the pattern you're knitting, the garment you're knitting. You've got to think about how tall you are, when we're talking about garments, we mainly talk about things like sweaters and cardigans. So you've got to think about how broad your shoulders are, how big your bust is, how big your waist is, how tall you are, how long your torso is, how long your arms are, things like that, because we all vary, and you know what it's like when you go into a shop and you can try on the same size in 5 different shops, or even the same size in 5 different nearly the same looking items in the same shop, and they probably fit you completely differently. A lot can vary. I know that certain shops I usually buy a certain size, but sometimes I'll pick up that size that I normally buy in that particular shop, and the fit will be completely different than what I'm used to. So don't just say I always knit a size medium, I always knit a size whatever. Do actually take time to get a tape measure out and measure yourself, and do be honest about your shape. I don't want to do this whole thing of certain garments are flattering for certain body shapes and sizes, because I think that varies. I mean, personally, I don't like wearing things that are very cropped because I'm quite sensitive about the size of my middle, which is quite big. I guess I'm probably what they would call an apple shape, but I don't like those terms. But I don't like wearing things that are cropped. But it would be wrong of me to say that cropped garments doesn't suit anyone who's a larger size, because that's not true. I see other women wear it all the time and it looks great on them. I'm just not comfortable in a cropped garment. Same thing with, I like a garment that is a little bit longer, sort of past my hips, but for some women that would not flatter their shape or look good on them at all, even though they might be similar size to me. So our tastes and things come into this as well. So be honest about the garment shape and how it will look on your body, and also whether you will like it. What kind of garment shapes do you like? Do you like loose, long and baggy? Do you like short and fitted? Do you like something in between? You've got to be honest about these things as well. The next thing I'm going to say is something that a lot of knitters try to ignore, and that's fine, but I do highly recommend you knit a tension or gauge swatch. Tension and gauge swatch is the same thing. I tend to use the word tension. The swatch is just a piece of knitting that will help you to measure your tension. And you need to knit that gauge swatch or tension swatch in the stitch pattern that the pattern recommends. So the pattern will normally have a detail for tension or gauge, and it'll say 20 stitches and 30 rows using 4mm needles over moss stitch, for example. Whatever stitch pattern it is, it will tell you to do that, and that's what you need to do. And that is the number that matters. You need to count your tension per 10 centimeters, because that's normally what the pattern says. So your pattern will normally give you the tension over 10 by 10 centimeters. So 10 centimeters that way, 10 centimeters that way, and you need to count that. Now, I know it's very difficult to make sure that you get the correct row tension and stitch tension. And I quite often get asked, well, what's more important, row tension or stitch tension? And I would say they're both important for different reasons. A lot of people say they pay more attention to stitch tension, but row tension also matters. So if a garment is knitted from the bottom up or the top down, then stitch tension will determine how wide your garment is and if it's coming out the width that you expect it to be. But the row tension will determine things like sleeve cap shaping, if your garment has set-in sleeves, for example. So row tension is important as well. So do try and make sure you can reach both stitch and row tension if you can, but sometimes you can't always get both of them correct. So then you've got to choose which one is more important in the garment you're knitting. And then remember that, say for example, my stitch tension is spot on, but my row tension isn't, then I've got to bear that in mind when I'm knitting the garment and how that may affect fit as I knit through the garment. A few other things to do with tension that are important. I could do a whole video on tension. I'm not sure if I've done that or not. Maybe I've already done that if I have a link below, but I could do a whole video on tension, and I'm not going to do that today. But it is also important that you know how to knit a tension swatch and that you treat the tension swatch correctly. So it's not enough to just cast on. So for example, the pattern says 20 stitches equals 10 centimeters. I've seen people cast on 20 stitches, literally knit that much, like just a few rows, and then try and lay the stocking stitch swatch out flat and measure it. For one thing, trying to get stocking stitch to actually lie flat is extremely difficult. And the other thing is that quite often when you cast on something, the first few rows actually look a lot wider. Then once you get further up, the fabric kind of settles in and the row doesn't look as wide. So to knit a tension swatch, you need to knit a proper swatch. And I would say that this swatch is actually a bit on the small side. I think I knitted this just to see what needle size to use. So I would say this tension swatch is a little bit on the small side, but it needs to be at least 10 by 10 centimeters in the middle of the swatch. So you should be able to measure 10 by 10 centimeters in the middle of the swatch, and then have a bit of fabric around the sides. So you're not measuring all the way out to the edge, because that's not very accurate. The worst thing is that one of the people I saw knitting that much before they measured their tension is actually somebody who's a knitwear designer, and I must admit I was a bit horrified, but each to their own. So I recommend knitting a proper swatch, slightly bigger than what you think you'll need, and then measure your tension in the middle. I also recommend washing the swatch and blocking it, or pressing it or steaming it, or whatever you're going to do to the final garment. So if it's something like lace that you might want to wet block and stretch, then you should do that to the swatch. If it's something that you might just wash, dry flat, then you should do that. If it's something that most garments you're going to wash at some point. So if it's something that you're going to hand wash and then just dry flat, I would do that to the swatch. If it's something that you're going to machine wash, I would do that to the swatch, especially because a lot of garments that do say they're machine washable are actually not. So if I was going to test the machine washing ability of a yarn, I would actually knit quite a big swatch and chuck it in the washing machine before I put a whole garment in a washing machine. But I think that's a whole nother video really. If you make any changes as you are knitting the garment, so if you decide that you want it slightly longer, for example, so one of the easiest ways to adjust the length of a garment is between the armhole and the hem. Whether you're knitting from the top down or bottom up, doesn't really matter. If you want a longer garment, the easiest place to add that length is between the underarm and the hem. And it is very easy to think, right, I'm going to add a couple of centimeters because I want it a bit longer. And then you do that on the back, and then you come to the front, and then you forget till you finish the front, and then you hold it up against the back and you think, why is the back 2 centimeters longer? So if you make any alterations while you're knitting, don't think you'll remember it. Unless your memory is a hell of a lot better than mine, don't expect to remember it. Always write everything down. Even if you think you will remember it, I highly recommend writing it down. And I highly recommend writing it down somewhere you're not going to lose it. So if you have a written pattern, sometimes it's easy to just scribble on it. But what if you lose that piece of paper? Sometimes you'll just grab a loose piece of scrap paper, a receipt, post-it note, whatever, and scribble on that. You might use a notebook. You might make a note on your phone. Whatever method works for you, but do try and make sure it's not something that's going to get easily lost. So I do make notes on a piece of paper on the pattern I'm knitting from. I do that quite a lot, but I'm also very, very careful about not losing that. I also write notes on my phone. Obviously, I can lose my phone and my phone can suddenly die, but I normally do it in Google Keep, which I can access on my tablet as well. So that's usually where I prefer to put notes because I feel it's a little bit safer. I've also used notebooks, but I have also lost notebooks, especially small ones. So just be careful. The more important the notes are, make sure you keep them in a safe place that you will be able to find afterwards. Especially if you get halfway through a garment and then put it away for a longer period of time. Once you get back to it, you're not going to remember what you did months or years ago, so do keep good notes of any adjustments that you are making. Okay, so let's talk about taking accurate measurements. The key to knitting a garment successfully, in my opinion, is 1, your tension, make sure you're knitting to the correct tension, and 2, to make sure you take accurate body measurements. So let's talk a little bit about that because I do think that's important. Be really honest about your measurements. And for example, I knitted a sweater for myself last summer, I think it was. And if I was going to, and I actually have those measurements saved on my phone. And if I was going to knit a sweater for myself now, a good 6 months or so later, I would measure myself again. I wouldn't just rely on those measurements I did last summer, because last autumn I lost a little bit of weight. Then over Christmas I gained a little bit of weight, and I lost a tiny bit, and then I think I put a little bit on again. So my weight fluctuates by 2 or 3 kilos quite frequently throughout the year. So I would do measurements again. If you're going to do a measurement, make sure you're wearing what you're going to wear under the garment. So if you are going to knit a sweater, that you have to wear a long sleeve t-shirt underneath, because otherwise it would be too itchy, for example, then I would measure with a t-shirt underneath. No, t-shirt fabric is not particularly thick, but it's a good idea to check the measurements with a t-shirt underneath if that's what you're going to wear with the garment. It can be really difficult to measure yourself, so if you have somebody else who can help you to measure yourself, I do recommend that you do that. I know it can be a little bit embarrassing to get somebody else to measure you, especially if you're not 100% comfortable about your body shape and size, but it is worth getting somebody else to help you measure yourself. If you're going to measure yourself and you don't have anyone else who can help you, then be extra careful. And sometimes I actually recommend measuring a garment that you like the fit of, because it can be difficult. So if I measure my bust and I think it measures, I don't know, say 100 centimeters, I know that's not my bust measurement, but let's say I'm measuring 100 centimeters, and I can tell that the looking at the pattern listing, I can tell that the garment measures 106 centimeters. So that's 6 centimeters positive ease. Now ease is the difference between your measurements and the garment measurements. And positive ease is when the garment is bigger than you are, and negative ease is when the garment is smaller than you are. So for example, socks, tights, things like that, they tend to have a negative ease, so they fit very snugly when you pull them on. Whereas sweaters usually will have either no ease or most commonly will have some positive ease. How much varies a lot. And it's easy to, you kind of think, right, okay, I measure 100 centimeters bust. The garment is 106 centimeters bust, that's 6 centimeters. You look at a tape measure, you think, right, okay, that's that much. You think that should be enough. But that's not actually that much when you think about the whole circumference of your body. 6 centimeters is not that much. So sometimes it can be difficult to visualize how much ease you would like. So I do recommend maybe measuring your body measurements, but also measure some sweaters or garments that you already own to see the difference. Now, one important thing to remember is that the thicker the yarn, the more ease, the more positive ease you will need. So this is just the jersey, thin jersey top. If I measured this and put it on, I can see how big it is. So if I measured this is quite loose fitting, quite roomy, which is usually what I like. If I had a sweater knitted in chunky yarn that measured the same width as this sweater, as this top, which is very loose fitting and roomy on me, if I had a chunky knit sweater that measured the same width, if I put that on, it wouldn't feel as loose as this sweater, as this top does. It would feel slightly more fitted, and that's because the thicker the fabric, the more ease you will need to get the same fit. So if you think about it, if the fabric is thicker, then that takes up some of that positive ease that you think you have. So if you have 10 centimeters positive ease and the fabric is that thick compared to that thick, that's going to make a little bit of a difference. So do make sure that you know that if you're going to knit something in chunky yarn or Aran weight yarn, you will need more positive ease than you do for a garment knitted in lace weight yarn or 4-ply or fingering weight yarn. So that's also an important thing to take into consideration. Check what measurements are listed in the pattern. So some patterns have schematics, which is just a line drawing, and some don't. Some give you loads of different measurements. Some give you like width and length and maybe sleeve length if you're lucky, and that's it. It does varies depending on the designer, the publisher, and that kind of thing. So if you first have a look at what the pattern actually says, does it have a schematic? If it doesn't, you can just draw out this very simple line drawing on a plain piece of paper. So if I just draw out one which has the garment kind of lying flat with the sleeves out to the side, and then you can fill in all the gaps. So that's fairly I know you shouldn't have to do your own schematic, but it isn't that difficult to do your own schematic. So it helps you to visualize what the measurements are. So if the garment doesn't have a schematic, I would just draw out a line drawing of the garment. It doesn't have to be very pretty or artistic. You just draw out a plain line drawing, and then you fill in all the measurements. So you can look at the pattern and see what measurements they list, and then some other measurements you may be able to work out from stitch and row tension. So if it gives you the bust measurements but it doesn't give you the shoulder width measurements, you can look and see how many stitches you got for the shoulders and how many stitches you have for the back neck, then add those and then divide that by your tension per centimeter to work out the width at the shoulder, things like that. I know you shouldn't have to do loads of maths when you buy a pattern, but sometimes it might be to your benefit just to get a calculator out and get comfortable with doing a very basic amount of maths. So and then what I would do is, so I would actually draw out the schematic by hand, fill in the garment measurements, maybe using one color, and then fill in my measurements for the same areas using a different color. So you can see on paper the difference between your measurements and the garment measurements. So if the garment is, for example, 42 centimeter long sleeves, and you know that you will probably need 44 centimeter long sleeves, you can see that fairly easily. So there are some things you can do like that to make it easier to choose which size to knit, and also to decide on what modifications you may have to make. So to summarize, the most important things, in my opinion, to achieve a perfect garment fit is to make sure that you are honest about your tension, that the tension, you're knitting to the correct tension, and that you are honest about your measurements and the garment measurements. Also think about your shape versus the garment shape. Make sure that you are honest about how you like things to fit, and forget about what society says is flattering on certain shapes and sizes. Do whatever makes you feel good, because that's the main thing. A garment can say that if you are a certain size or shape, you should wear a certain type of garment. But if that doesn't make you feel good when you're wearing it, then it's not the right garment for you. So whatever size or shape you are, you want to knit garments that make you feel good, because it's not cheap to knit a garment and it takes an awful lot of time, and you want to make sure you're happy. You also got to make sure that your disappointment in the garment, if you knit something that you don't think makes you look as great as you were hoping you would look, is actually realistic. So knitting a garment, no matter how well it fits me, it's not going to make me look like I'm super skinny supermodel. You know, I am the size I am, and I want to knit a garment that makes me feel good, but I'm still going to have the issues that I have with my body and the judgment that I have about the size of my body when I look in the mirror. So if I knit a sweater that can fit me perfectly and other people say, oh, that looks great on you, but if I look in the mirror and I'm thinking I still look fat, because I quite often look in the mirror and think I look fat, I don't like the way I look. We all have body issues and I'm trying to overcome mine. But if I think I look too big or bigger than I want to be, then I will still look bigger than I want to be, even if I wear a great fitting garment. Those issues are in my head, not to do with whether the garment fits me or not. So I do quite often see people saying that they're not happy with the garment they've knitted, even though it fits them great, and I think it looks great on them, they're not happy with it. And sometimes I think that comes about insecurities and thoughts they have about their body and their size, rather than how the garment actually fits them. If you're not happy with your body, putting on a great fitting sweater may make you feel better, but it may not, even though you look great in it and it fits you perfectly and it fits you the way you wanted it to fit you. You've also got to be realistic about how you feel about your body, and if everything you put on, if you think everything you put on looks bad on you, then the problem is probably either you're buying the wrong size and it doesn't look good on you. But if you're buying the correct size and you think everything looks bad on you, it's probably more of a psychological issue rather than things not fitting you, because we all have hang-ups. Most of us have hang-ups about our bodies. I'm trying to be more accepting of my body, but I would like to be a few kilos lighter than I am and a few clothes sizes smaller than I am. I felt like that ever since I was 13 years old, which is quite sad, but I'm happier with my body now than I was a few years ago. But it's a constant ongoing work for me. So sometimes I'm going to make something or buy something that I think looks great, but when I actually put it on, I think, oh, I'm disappointed in how I look. And that's not because I don't look good in it. It's actually because of how I feel about the way I look. So do make sure you differentiate between those two different things. So I hope this video was helpful, even if I went off topic slightly there right at the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got some helpful tips and hints about how to try and make sure that your garment will fit you, and to be realistic about managing your expectations. Also, one other thing I think is very, very important, and this is not just when it comes to knitting garments, this is knitting anything really, is that if you're not happy with it, don't be afraid to rip out and re-knit it. So if you knit something and you've knitted the whole back and you realize it's coming up too big or too small, don't be afraid to rip it out and re-knit it to achieve a better fit. If you knit a whole garment and you realize it's not the right garment for you, that you're never going to like it, either see if you can give it away to somebody else who will appreciate it, but otherwise think about whether you can rip it out and re-knit it, so you can use that yarn for something else. Especially if it's a nice yarn. I know it's demoralizing if you've spent hours knitting something and then having to rip it out, but it's better to rip it out and end up with something you're happy with, especially if you haven't finished it. I can understand taking apart a whole garment and re-knitting it. That's tough. I'm not sure if I would do that, to be quite honest, but getting halfway through a garment, halfway up the back, and you realize that it's not going to be big enough or it's going to be too big, it's better to rip it out and re-knit it than to carry on and hope everything's going to be okay. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did. If you have any questions or comments about this video, please leave them below. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please consider subscribing. I post videos every single Friday, and I hope you like the videos I post. If there's something else you'd like me to talk about in these videos, or any tutorials like me to do, anything like that, please do leave a comment below as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.